The fire crackled low, throwing shadows across our little circle of friends. It was one of those perfect nights for telling scary stories, clear skies, a chill in the air, and nothing but the dark woods pressing in around us. Someone had just finished a tale about a bear sniffing around a camper and crunching into cans of root beer like soda cans were trail mix. Another friend jumped in with a story about hikers who swore they'd seen Sasquatch after stumbling on a guy swimming naked under a waterfall. The laughter was loud, but the silence afterwards seemed even louder. That was when Jared leaned forward, his face half lit by the fire. "All right," he said, lowering his voice. "I've got one that'll really get you." He launched into a story about a Boy Scout left behind on a dark trail, only to be knocked into the brush by some unseen thing in the night. His voice dipped and rose, and we hung on every word, picturing the brush, the footsteps, the sudden crash. By the end, we were laughing again, but our nerves were a little frayed. Then came the prank. Nobody saw him slip away, but while the rest of us huddled closer to the flames, someone crept off into the trees. Just as another friend was describing a bear nosing its way into a tent full of kids, the night split open with a guttural growl, low and close. The fire popped, a couple of us screamed, and one poor soul nearly fell backward off the log bench. What followed was chaos. Someone dropped their mug, another bolted for the tents, and I'll admit my heart thudded so hard I could barely breathe. Out of the shadows came a figure, thrashing and growling, wearing a tangle of brush and a headlamp, twisted to flash in our faces. It was Jared, and let me tell you, fear turned to fury in the span of a second. A couple of us cursed him out, another threatened to shove him into the embers, and poor Dave, who'd already been jittery since the Sasquatch tale, was pale as a ghost. The laughter didn't come right away. First came the anger, then the shaky relief, then, finally, the chuckles. But as the night wore on and we sat back down around the fire, roasting what was left of the marshmallows, we found ourselves laughing harder than before. Because that's the thing about campfire scares. Fear and laughter live side by side, and sometimes it takes a ridiculous prank to remind you how thin that line really is. The fire had burned down to glowing coals by the time everyone settled back onto the logs. The laughter had faded into uneasy silence, the kind where you're not sure if the fun is over or if everyone's just waiting for the next shoe to drop. Dave still looked rattled, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the dark beyond the tree line. "Not funny," he muttered, shaking his head. Jared kept grinning, but even he had the sense to tone it down. The forest around us seemed different after the prank, darker, heavier. The night had that stillness you only notice after a shock, when even the smallest rustle sounds like it's meant for you. Somewhere out past camp, a branch cracked. Not a squirrel scurry crack, but something bigger. Everyone froze. I could feel the tension ripple through the circle. Nobody wanted to admit they were spooked again, not after Jared's stunt, but the sound was real enough to make us all sit up straighter. "It's just a deer," someone whispered. But in that moment, nobody moved. The fire popped, sending sparks upward like fireflies escaping, and we all leaned closer, eyes fixed on the shadows. Then came another noise, slow footsteps, deliberate padding on leaves. This time, it wasn't Jared. He was sitting right across from me, still smirking, but not smiling quite so wide. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We've had our laugh, but that's enough of the scary business. Let's just stoke the fire." I leaned forward, tossed on a log, and the flames jumped high again, pushing back the dark. For a moment, everyone breathed easier, but the woods weren't done with us. A low hoot rolled out from the treetops, an owl's call echoing like a voice you couldn't quite place. Then, almost on cue, something rustled behind the tents. Not loud, just enough to stir the hair on the back of our necks. We glanced at one another, each silently asking, prank, animal, or something else? Jared raised his hands. "Hey, don't look at me. I'm right here." That was true, and somehow that was worse. We all sat there, still as stones, the fire painting our faces in orange and shadow. Whatever had moved out there was watching, or passing through, or waiting. Nobody wanted to check, but nobody wanted to ignore it either. The line between prank and reality had blurred, and we were caught right in the middle. The debate started in whispers, as if speaking too loud might invite whatever lurked out there to step closer. It's probably a raccoon, one of the guys said, though his voice cracked halfway through. Maybe a deer, another offered, but he didn't sound convinced. Dave shook his head violently. That wasn't no raccoon. Too heavy, too close. He was gripping his knees, knuckles white, eyes darting between the fire and the tents, like he couldn't decide which way he'd run if it came to it. Jared, trying to salvage some pride after his prank, puffed up his chest. Fine, I'll check it out. He stood, grabbed a half-burned stick from the fire and held it like a torch. The flames flickered across his face, making him look braver than he probably felt. Sit down, idiot, I muttered. But he was already edging toward the tents. The rest of us leaned forward, the circle tightening as the shadows swallowed him up. The night seemed to hold its breath. There was silence for a beat, then two. Then came a sudden crash of leaves and Jared yelping, "Oh, hell!" He stumbled back into the firelight, eyes wide, shirt streaked with dirt. "Something moved out there," he shouted, pointing back toward the tents. The circle erupted. Half of us laughed nervously, the other half scrambled to their feet. I'll admit, my heart was pounding too. Jared's torch sputtered, sparks falling like fireflies as he waved it around. Okay, I said, raising my hands. We don't all need to panic, let's just check together. So we did. 5 of us, torches in hand, edging past the glow of the campfire into the deeper dark where the tents sat in a loose row. The air smelled sharp with pine and damp earth, and every step crunched loud enough to make me wince. We circled the tents, checking every corner. Nothing, just shadows, brush, and the distant hoot of that same owl. But then, just as the tension was easing, one of the tents shivered. Not from wind, from the inside. Everyone froze. Nobody wanted to unzip it. Nobody even breathed. Maybe it's the wind, someone whispered. There is no wind, Dave hissed back. And he was right. The night was still, too still. For a long moment we just stood there, the 5 of us frozen in a half circle around the trembling tent. The firelight behind us barely reached this far, and the fabric glowed faintly orange from the distant flames. Nobody wanted to move first. Dave's breathing was sharp and ragged, like he was already halfway to bolting. All right, Jared whispered, gripping his torch like a sword. On 3, 1, 2, wait, I hissed, grabbing his arm. If something's in there, do we really want to just open the door for it? The silence that followed was heavier than the woods themselves. The tent quivered again, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was inside was shifting its weight. Then came a faint sound, like a snuffle, maybe a grunt. Dave nearly jumped out of his skin. All right, fine, I said, trying to summon courage I didn't actually feel. We can't just stand here all night. Jared, you're the genius who started this mess. Your move. So, with more bravado than brains, Jared crouched down, torch shaking in his hand, and yanked the zipper. The sound was loud, shrill, and in that heartbeat, we all braced for claws, teeth, or at least glowing eyes. What came instead was fur and a startled squeal. Out shot a raccoon, eyes shining in the torchlight, streaking between Jared's legs like a furry bullet. Jared shrieked louder than anyone, tripped over his own feet, and landed flat on his back, while the rest of us leapt aside like dominoes. The raccoon darted straight for the creek and was gone in seconds. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the laughter started. First a chuckle, then a full-on eruption. We laughed so hard our torches sputtered from shaking. Even Dave cracked a grin, though he was still pale as paper. Jared sat up, brushing dirt from his hair. Yeah, laugh it up, he groaned, but even he couldn't help smirking once the shock wore off. It took a while to calm down enough to stumble back to the fire, still giggling in bursts. The fear had broken, melted into something warmer, something familiar. But as we settled back around the flames, wiping tears from our eyes, I couldn't help but notice the forest was still watching. The raccoon explained the noise by the tents, sure, but that heavy branch crack from earlier, that still hung unanswered in the dark. Back at the fire, the mood had shifted again. The raccoon incident had wrung the tension out of us, leaving nothing but laughter and sore sides. Someone joked about writing "Beware of trash bandits" on the camp sign, and another teased Jared for screaming louder than the rest of us combined. Even Dave, who'd been tight as a coiled spring all night, finally relaxed enough to roast a marshmallow, though he still cast a glance at the trees every now and then. The flames danced higher as we piled on more wood, warming our faces and pushing back the shadows. The forest seemed calmer now, less menacing, though every so often a rustle or owl's call reminded us we weren't alone out here. That thought didn't scare us anymore though. It just felt like part of the rhythm of the night. As the laughter ebbed, a quieter mood settled over the circle. "You know," I said, staring into the fire, "that's the thing about nights like this. Fear and fun get so tangled up you don't know which one you're feeling until it's over." Heads nodded around the fire, the glow lighting up tired smiles. Jared sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, I'll admit it. Maybe the prank went a little too far." He paused, then grinned. "But you've got to admit it was unforgettable." "Unforgettable, yeah," Dave muttered, shaking his head, though the corners of his mouth twitched upward. "Just don't try it again, or I'll be the one doing the scaring." That got another round of chuckles, and just like that, the air between us smoothed out. The woods creaked and whispered, but the fire held steady, our little island of warmth against the dark. One by one, conversation dwindled, replaced by the soft crackle of burning logs and the distant ripple of the creek. When we finally crawled into our tents, the night still carried a charge, a sense that the woods were alive, that eyes might be watching from the shadows. But it wasn't fear anymore, it was respect. A reminder that out here you could laugh, you could scare each other half to death, but in the end you were all in it together. And that was the real magic of that night. Not the prank, not the raccoon, but the way fear, laughter and forgiveness braided into a memory we'd tell around many more fires to come.